to this wonderful show we have for you today. We're about to do a little bit of, what do we say, going from the earth into the spirit and soul. Definitely listen to The Heart of Innovation here on AM 1220 KDOW. We should be starting in right about, oh, look at that, now. So, again, thank you so much for tuning in. And, well, keep your ears open, keep your ears listening for a great show.
AM 1220 KDOW.
Sponsored by The Way to My Heart Incorporated.
Welcome to the Heart of Innovation. 60 minutes that could save life and limb with new breakthrough ideas and innovation changing the healthcare landscape. Brought to you by Patient Advocacy Group, the Global PAD Association at padhealth.org, in partnership with Reflow Medical, the pulse of medical ingenuity. Here are your hosts for the Heart of Innovation, Emmy Award-winning journalist and founder of the Global PAD Association, Kym McNicholas, and interventional cardiologist and founder of Save My Piggies Health and Wellness, Dr. John Phillips.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Heart of Innovation. Today, we're exploring a topic that might surprise you. With Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or RFK, seemingly having enough votes to confirm his nomination as the Secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services, we wanted to highlight one of his most intriguing focus areas, regenerative agriculture. Now, I know what you're thinking. RFK can be controversial, but today we are setting aside all political debates to explore something truly fascinating. Why this topic out of all the things that are on RFK's agenda? Well, during my recent trip to the Limb Savers Society conference in El Paso, Texas, I met United Nations delegate Alejandro Carrillo, a rancher who in 2 hours completely transformed my understanding of food, health, and our environment. Our conversation on that flight was incredibly eye-opening. Here's the provocative question that stemmed from that conversation, which we are tackling today. What if beef, yes, beef, isn't the villain we have been told? What if the problem isn't beef itself, but actually how we've been producing it? Beef has long been linked to cardiovascular disease and cancer, but Carrillo suggests something maybe a little radical in some points of view, that returning to natural ecosystem methods our ancestors used could fundamentally change the nutritional profile on our food. We know this topic will spark strong opinions in all directions, and that's why I'm always thrilled to have our trusted cardiologist, Dr. John Phillips, and my amazing co-host to provide a balanced medical perspective. We'll hear Carrillo's incredible journey from software engineer to regenerative rancher, and we're going to explore how his work, supported by the United Nations, could revolutionize how we think about food, health, and our planet. So get ready for a conversation that might just change how you choose what's on your plate. Dr. Phillips, are you ready to open up Pandora's box?
No pun intended, but that's a lot to digest, Miss Kimberly. Happy Saturday. I hope you're doing well. I really am excited about this topic, and I can't wait to speak to Alejandro and just, again, understand this whole regenerative farming kind of movement. I've long been an advocate, and even more so now that I'm venturing into trying to be more proactive with not only my patients, but myself. But food is medicine. And a lot of times we don't necessarily kind of get into the granular aspects of what we eat, where that food comes from. And I've been reading about regenerative farming and restoring soil health and things of that nature. And quite frankly, I never even thought about the soil before learning about this or reading about it. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic.
Well, we only have 1 hour. So what do you say
Yep.
we kick things off with a moment of inspiration and get things underway?
Dr. John Phillips, spectacular vascular moment of inspiration.
So again, putting politics aside, I wanted to find a quote from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as it speaks to his stance on, advocating for appropriate agricultural practices and things of that nature. So He's quoted as saying, environmental advocacy is not just about protecting our planet for future generations. It's about protecting the public trust and our shared values, ensuring justice and safeguarding humanity. I think we can all get behind that, whether we're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or whatever. So let's jump in.
I think that's a great way to bring in Alejandro Carrillo because I can see he's, just chomping at the bit, ready to comment on that. What did you think of that quote? It probably resonates with you, right, Alejandro?
Yeah. Kym, thanks for having me today. I'm very excited to be with you
Mhm.
and talk about the how similar is what we do as ranchers to what you do in medicine. I mean, we all related about microbiology, about life. And as you just mentioned, I remember when I asked my dad what my dad came from a ranching family and what should I study? He said, study whatever you want, but nothing related to ranching. And I said, okay, well, let's take a look at that computers, software engineer. So I spent 15 years in the IT industry, mostly in the US. And then my dad just went to visit me when I was living in Miami and said, hey, why don't you help me at the ranch when he turns 70? I spent a lot of my time when I was a kid on ranches in the Chihuahuan Desert. And just to give you an idea, the Chihuahuan Desert is the largest desert on North America. It includes 3 states in the US, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, but also 4 states in Mexico. So I was actually wondering, what can we do in the desert? Because I saw the suffering of a lot of ranchers, just a good year, 3 bad years. And I was very fortunate at that time to meet some of my future mentors and friends in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, which is where we ranch. And just great things have come since we implemented holistic management, rational grazing.
And so I'm curious. So I would imagine, I mean, why would your dad say, don't study ranching in school? Was there something about the textbook and the way in which it was being taught that didn't resonate in the way that his traditional approach was working?
Yeah, I don't really know why he said that, but I can tell you that I can guess. And it could be 2 things. One thing that we've been dealing for many years is if you have a few kids on a ranch and you see a smart kid, you say, hey, why don't you go to the city? And then we keep the rest of the ranch. But I can tell you that has to change because we need very smart people producing what is really so fundamental to us, which is the food. And the other thing is universities, unfortunately, uh, have been influenced by a lot of the industry to teach the future farmers managers all about inputs. And the way we ranch is all about no inputs. Because if you think about, I mean, a lot of people complain about ranching getting like very destructive in the environment. And but the way we manage our cattle is quite different. Actually, if you ask me, like, what do you do with your cattle, with your livestock? Well, we try to mimic nature. We try to be in sync with nature, and that way, we actually not only don't destruct the environment, but we actually regenerate the environment. In the Chihuahuan Desert, where we've been actually dealing with a lot of desertification, uh, we are able to get the grasslands back. And then you may be saying, yeah, but how come if it is a desert? Well, I think what we are missing is the historical ecological perspective, where when the Spaniards came, I mean, probably the first ones to put something in writing on the southwest, northern Mexico, what they saw was just these beautiful, lush grasslands. So tall, the grasses were so tall that they reached the saddle. It was just amazing. Even in places that you see like, oh my God, that's a big desert, like the Salt Lake, that area. When the priests of the Spanish priests first found that place, they said that it was a beautiful, lush, diverse grass.
So it just seems that we have been destroying things as we've gone along. And now, instead of using chemical and artificial means to keep things going as they are, what you're trying to do is to build, we'll actually just go back to the way things originally were and restore the original ecosystem. And coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation, we'll get to the core. Don't worry if you feel like we're going a little faster than you. We're going to go back to the beginning and we're going to define the core principles of regenerative agriculture, regenerative farming, and regenerative ranching. So don't worry, stay with us and don't go away.
Leg health can indicate risk.
Awesome. So we dove right into it. So we're going to come back just a little bit. And John, you want to take us back and really kind of get into the core principles and such?
Yeah, I think, Alejandro, if possible, maybe we spend a minute or two just kind of, if we take a step back and if you can explain to me and our audience, like the way I look at it, and I'll say this on the air, is you're a rancher, right? You raise cattle, I eat it. I'm pretty brain dead when it comes to that. But I guess the question that I have is, what is it about that you're trying to do that's kind of different, and that how does that loop back into this whole notion of sustainability and protecting the soil and things of that nature? So this will be perfect, but again, I'm just listening, man. This is interesting to me. I'm just a knuckle dragging cardiologist that puts stents in people, so I'm happy to learn.
No, you're at the core of everyone's life flow. So my understanding, so what we've kind of covered is just the fact that we used to not be all desert, and a lot of people would blame like global warming and things like that on the increased desert land. But what you're saying is that the way we've handled the lands over the decades and centuries, right, has actually contributed to Mother Earth being very different, more desert-like, not conducive to these nutrient-dense
All right, everyone,
ecosystems,
5
and
seconds
so
till
our
the air.
food's being impacted. Okay.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So, Alejandro, let's get back into it. Now, during the break, I was just explaining the way I think about ranching, which is very rudimentary in the sense that you're a rancher, you raise cattle. I don't know how you do it. It comes to my plate. It's quite tasty. I don't think twice about I should, but I don't necessarily think twice about what went into raising that animal, what it fed, how the soil was managed. But I'm getting the sense that thought process has contributed to the degradation of the land over many, many years, and you're trying to change that. Is that a fair statement?
It is, John. I think one of the challenges we have is trying to dominate nature when nature is so complex. I mean, imagine like you're a doctor, how complex is the body, right? Nature is so complex as well, that the best we can do as ranchers is trying just to get our management of the ranch and the cattle and the livestock as close as possible to nature, and let nature do all the work. So what we do, in a few words, is trying to mimic the great migrations that used to be in North America with the bison and elk and so on. So with the cattle, we actually are able to get the cattle together through, let's say, electric fence or ritual fence, like a herd. And then we move our cattle quite often. That way, the cattle can fertilize through manure, urine, saliva, and so on. Because what we're lacking in most places is life in the soil, biology. So how in the desert can you bring biology? Well, it's through the gut of the cattle. I mean, through the gut of the cattle, you bring the moisture, but also you bring the biology. And that way, I mean, we know that the cattle can digest a lot of this low quality forage, but how about the plants? I mean, at the end of the day, you're eating, let's say, beef that will reflect the plants that that animal ate. And the plant to be able to actually get into those minerals in the soil, it needs to get them through the biology in the soil. But if we have a broken water cycle, meaning that when it rains, you're not infiltrating the water, then that plant actually cannot get the mineral and the nutrients because there's very limited biology, and the cows will suffer, and eventually we will suffer. So it's all interrelated. So how do we actually create a better water cycle? Because water cycle is really very intrinsic, very like a backbone of this.
Right.
A
And
lot
you're
of
not talking about rain and how much rain, because that's the first thought that would come to people's minds is, well, you're in the desert, there's not a lot of rain. So how are we getting this water, and how are you, um, attracting more water retention in these lands?
Yeah, well, it's pretty amazing because even we only get about 8 inches per. If we get a good rain, it's 8 inches per year of rain, which is a very low level in the, let's say, in the Southwest in the U.S. But it's not actually what the rain you get, is how much rain you can infiltrate and then keep it in the soil. So that's what we call effective rainfall. And if you go to other states, not only Chihuahua, but let's say Colorado, we are only filtrating about 30% of the rain we get. That's why we have these floods. That's why we have these dry soils that promote more fires. And that's why we have very weak plants. Because if you take a shovel and take a look at the soil is going to be compacted. And in order for microbiology to thrive, then we need air in the soil. But then the first thing that you're going to come to your mind is, oh, well, let's till the soil. Let's open the soil mechanically. It's not the way it works. Actually, the way it works is we need the mycorrhizal fungi to create aggregation in the soil, to put air in the soil. So when it rains, the first step to fix the water cycle is to infiltrate that water.
So Alejandro, if I may just try to draw an analogy, is the soil kind of like the gut microbiome in a human, in the sense that if that is out of whack, then everything else can kind of be out of whack? And the second question I have is, does what you're trying to do translate to the consumer, in the sense that, am I getting a healthier cow that may be less inflammatory or whatever? I mean, is there evidence to suggest that this is the way to raise cattle and feed not only the US but the world?
That is right, John. I mean, I have seen this issue of desertification pretty much all around the world, where I've been, Australia and Africa and the steppes of Mongolia. And yeah, it all comes to the microbiology because I don't know if you know these folks, but all the soils are fully mineralized. There's no lack of minerals in any soil. What we're lacking is the microbiology to actually take those minerals and put into the plants. And then if you have a strong nutrient-dense plant with all the phytochemicals on the plant, and you're having a cow or, I mean, a sheep or goat, whatever you're eating that plant, that means that that cow is getting all the phytonutrients. And we know now that those phytonutrients are part of the meat. And we're talking about that thousands of tertiary components. Now, when you try that kind of meat, I mean, a lot of consumers tells me, how do I know if a rancher is doing a good job or a farmer? Well, use your senses. Does it look nice? Does it smell good? Does it taste good? Because remember, at the end of the day, John, the phytonutrients, they are called also flavonoids, right? So that means the flavor. So if it is a meat, a piece of meat that you're eating, that meat needs to bring all the phytonutrients. And we know now through the research that the livestock raised on a diversity of plants, we have way more phytonutrients and also a way more balanced omega-3 to 6, almost 1-to-1, than compared to meat that you're producing by feeding the cattle grains.
And coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation, we're going to continue this very powerful and insightful conversation and loop in the chairman of the World Food Bank, Richard Lackey. So stay with us. And if you have any questions, bring them our way. We're going to continue this conversation next.
And you don't need to loop me in if you don't want to. I'm happy just to throw out ideas and share. And part of my background is just enough medicine to be dangerous. But Dr. Phillips can ask.
No, Richard, we'd love to have you. But so I guess the next question I want to ask, if it's appropriate, because, in my mind, I would imagine there's some engineer maybe at some, not a pharmaceutical, but, some pesticide company that's trying to think like, all right, well, how do we engineer the micronutrients into the soil and then into the plants and into the cattle and all that stuff? But is that number one, or is somebody trying to do that? And number two, is that even possible as opposed to just letting nature take over?
My quick answer is that there are companies doing that, but they're trying to find a synthetic way to create metabolic pathways to take minerals and vitamins and make them more absorbable so that they can patent it and make money on it. Most of what you see Alejandro doing is he's literally taking a system that's damaged and he's giving it the nutrition and the water so that the natural system comes back to life.
Perfect. I'd love to I want to keep hitting on like why this is important, why we as consumers need to understand this and be advocates for it. Regardless what you think about, the spokesman who seems to be RFK Jr. or whatever. Cause it's like, I don't know. In Ohio, I get access to patients of mine who raise cattle and I'll, I just bought some meat from a patient and it just tastes different. It's just cleaner. I can't describe it, but I feel like
that's what we do. We get ours now. And I was telling Alejandro the other day that we get ours now from a local rancher versus when we have gotten grass-fed, grass-finished ones in the store, it tastes different even than when we get it from the local ranch here. And I think it's because of the way in which they're raising these cattle. But I'm curious because if you can make the delineation between how the regular ranchers, the mass producers that are out there, if you can make that delineation between what they're doing to destroy the land and lead to less nutrient dense cattle versus what you're doing, and maybe make that connection. And well, maybe that is why all the studies that are out there about beef causing cancer and beef causing cardiovascular disease, I mean, that may be because of that imbalance in omegas as being a big part of it and what they're eating, which is ultimately what you're eating.
Alejandro, do you call what you're doing AMP grazing?
No,
Okay.
I call it more holistic, rational, not rotational, rational, because I like the thinking process.
Right.
Attention all.
You do
Sorry to
see an
interrupt.
increase
We
in the
have
number
about
of
5
native
seconds
grasses
till
they
we
grow.
air.
So you get a variety in their diet. That's a big part of it.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. My head is like spinning as I'm trying to process everything that's going on, and I have so many questions for Alejandro, and I'd love to loop in Richard as well. But so bring us back to this notion of getting the micronutrients into the soil, and then obviously the plants, and then the animals, and the whole like process of it. Two questions that we talked about during break. One of which, is there a way to do this synthetically and therefore, I guess mass produce it in a sense that someone's going to make some money off of it? And the second question I have is, and Kym alluded to this during break, what is different about the mass produced meat that most of us eat as opposed to, Alejandro, what you're doing?
Yeah, just comparing the conventional ranching versus regen holistic ranching. And remember, we used to be very conventional ranchers until we figured out that this was a much better way for the animals, for the consumers, and so on. So the conventional rancher actually leave the cattle for too long on the same pasture and then don't move the cattle that often. That means that the cattle are overgrazing some of the grasses and eventually killing, but also overgrazing other grasses. So if you actually go to a rangeland, pasture land, you only want to see green and yellow. We call it green and gold. You don't want to see gray. This is a more common conditions on the western U.S. Uh, where you see a lot of let's say New Mexico, a lot of grasses are already gray, oxidized. So by we sticking the cattle into one pasture for too long, we're not mimicking nature. I mean, if you see the elk, the bison, historically, they keep moving, 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 moving. And that way they provide enough rest for the plants and then also the diversity. Because remember, when we're seeing that there's a difference in the meat, the latest research says that that animal really needs to eat at least 10 different plants to be considered to be more biodiverse. And one of the problems, for example, with a lot of grass fed, that they ended up doing it in a irrigated pasture, is just 2 or 3 species of plants, of grasses, forbs. So that's what we need to be very keen into saying, okay, when you are trying to buy your meat, saying, okay, what is the diversity that you have in your ranch? Because that will be reflected into my health as more phytonutrients and a better balanced omega-3 to 6 ratio.
And I'd love for Richard Lackey, the chairman of the World Food Bank, to weigh in with his thoughts, because I mean, I almost feel like I want to lobby the FDA and say, hey, we need that on the labels. Did this cow actually eat, or did this elk or did this bison actually eat 10 different grasses as they say they should in order to be nutrient dense?
It's a great point. And the challenge is that everywhere that farmers grow, the dynamics of the natural ecosystem are different. So the what's on the ground in New Mexico and Mexico is different than what's on the ground in Eastern Tennessee or North Carolina. And what I'd start with is saying that for many years, we were part of the group of folks trying to find better ways to grow food. And we used what you now see as a lot of vertical farming, but we did greenhousing. And just as a story that kind of explains what we found, when we grew tomatoes, we would grow inside of a greenhouse in the soil, but in a greenhouse where we would feed them. And we also did hydroponic, where we would grow and we would put in 26 minerals and vitamins that we wanted to be, that we knew that were key to growing the structure of a tomato. And quite frankly, they would come out looking great. They were beautiful. And we grew 8 times more tomatoes in the greenhouse than we grew in the soil outside. But when you tasted the tomato, to your point earlier, Kym, it tasted like it was grown in water. It was very watered down and didn't have a lot of flavor. The tomatoes grown in the soil were luscious. They were rich and flavorful, and it's like food used to be. That's because God, or whomever you want to, bear gifting to, it put 850 plus nutrients in the soil. And when you have a balanced ecosystem, all of those components are absorbed and built in to what becomes a tomato or a potato or an onion or a pepper or a cow. And that makes all the difference in the world.
So Richard, like when I go to Whole Foods, right? Let's say I go to Whole Foods and I get a fillet and it says grass fed. Like to me, that means, or an organic grass fed. That to me, that's like, what more can I do? But
Well, grass finish.
or whatever. And like, and to me, I'm like, oh, grass fed. I guess that makes more sense than giving them some type of pellet or something. But there's even more to that, right? And like, how does the consumer know? I got to ask more about what kind of grass, and there's 14 versus 2 or whatever, right?
It's a great point. Alejandro could give you specifics of how they do it, but to his earlier point, when when you grow on a specific type of grass, you can get a cow that's pretty fat and it looks good, like me, but not have all the nutrients that's supposed to be there, right? Whereas if you put a cow on something with diversity, something more than just donuts of grass, then all of a sudden it had, when you cut it up and you see the difference between a pig or a cow, you'll have this big cake of fat on the cow that was grain finished. But you'll actually have more red meat and a deeper red meat and a healthier and better tasting red meat on the cow that was grass fed. And it'll even be better colored and better tasting when it's on a variety of grasses. So part of it comes from you'll actually be able to taste the difference to me. I
And
don't
coming
know
up,
how you measure that, but you'll be able to taste the difference.
coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation, we'll have more with the chair of the World Food Bank and also amazing rancher and UN delegate Alejandro Carrillo. And we're going to be talking about just how RFK may help accelerate the move towards more regenerative ranching and regenerative farming. So don't go away. Okay. Yeah,
One
that
of the
was
things
great.
Thank you for letting me share something. John, one of the things that may be interesting, and I don't know if we have a lot of data on it, but from the cardiology side, in different parts of the country, we have different cardiac challenges because of shortages in selenium, or magnesium, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of that comes because the soil has lost that because of the crops that have been grown for 100 years. So what Alejandro is finding now, I think, as well, is that people become healthier when the soil is balanced. Everything begins with the soil. And when that's balanced, all of a sudden health problems start getting reduced, because they're getting whatever that nutrient was that missing. It may be one thing, and you can't just spray selenium on the soil. You can't just spray magnesium on the soil. It needs to become a dynamic part of the plants that grow there natively.
Yeah, I'd love
That's
to.
interesting
Yeah.
because Dr. Phillips, I'm curious from your perspective in the blood work. I just know from my dad, and as I said, my dad's in the hospital right now as of yesterday. And one of the things that you look at the blood work, he's absent selenium, absent magnesium. I mean, all of those levels are low, and those are all things you can get from food. And now they're trying to supplement in big doses, which should never have gotten to this point if all of the food, he eats lots of vegetables, but obviously the vegetables are not picking up the nutrients from good soil. So
Yeah, I mean,
that really
I guess,
is disconcerting.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently on that. I mean, when someone comes in with low magnesium, that's usually a factor of potentially a medication or something along those. Most of us have adequate magnesium. I guess my thought is, and I'd love to talk about this so we can provide insight to our listeners. How does this stuff translate into being healthier? And in my mind, I think having a balanced soil allows for potentially less inflammation, and inflammation, I think, just drives a lot of the disease processes that we talk about. They're cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegenerative, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. That's all linked to inflammation, and at least in my point of view, linked to what we eat. We're living longer because we're not necessarily dying of infectious diseases anymore because we've got great medicines to treat this stuff. But we're also, I think, people are dying earlier from cancer, and a lot of it has to do, again, in my opinion, with what we're putting into our bodies, because I don't know what else has changed, to be honest with you.
And it's interesting. Why is it that, and in relevance to this conversation as well, is that so my grandfather and great grandfather all ate meat, lived into their late 80s and 90s, almost to 100, and they ate meat. That was part of their staple. That was literally Every night there was a steak. Every night there was some sort of red meat, not even as much chicken, but lots of red meat. And they all lived. But now we're all dying a little sooner with cardiovascular disease and cancer and told don't eat any more meat, especially red meat.
I think we can talk about this too, but at least in my opinion, a lot of it has to do with the public perception, lobbyists. For a long time, I think we felt eggs were really bad for you, but honestly, I'm a big proponent of eating eggs. There's a lot. I mean, they talk about the high cholesterol levels, but quite frankly, the amount of dietary cholesterol that you put into your body as it contributes to atherosclerosis is pretty minimal. A lot of it has to do with your liver and how it's metabolized and transported and all that stuff. And we're learning more. I think the fact that RFK is involved in this, he's a spokesperson now and is shining
Yeah.
light on this whole process, which is exciting for guys like Alejandro and Richard, I would imagine.
Everyone, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. Just a
that's what
heads
it
up,
would be
10
great.
seconds until we
Thank
air.
you. And it'd be great to get into the RFK
Okay.
and his role, if you don't mind.
Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. For more on today's topic, go to theheartofinnovation.org. That's theheartofinnovation.org. Once again, here's Emmy Award-winning journalist Kym McNicholas and interventional cardiologist Dr. John Phillips.
Time flies when you're having fun. Unfortunately, we're kind of rounding third on this conversation, but there's a lot more to get to. So I wanted to ask Alejandro and Richard their thoughts on having an advocate now in a very prominent, potentially a very prominent governmental position, i.e., RFK Jr. in like working towards getting you guys helping you get to where you want to be with revolutionizing how we're raising cattle and eating and things of that nature.
Alejandro, do you want to start?
Yeah, we're excited about the possibility to scale this up because some people think that raising cattle or livestock on grasslands will take a lot of land. But I can tell you that in my place, instead of if we were all managing under rechain, holistic, rational principles, instead of us running in a certain area 2,000 cows, we could be running 10,000 cows. So imagine there's so much upside potential if we get the support and also, and most important, the education and strong references. So because we ranchers can be days listening, but we're convinced by what we see mostly.
It's
So you're
interesting because part of it is that, of course, number one priority, right? We want to be healthier. We want to be eating healthier, more nutrient dense foods. But then along with that, there's also the big issue that cows and livestock are accelerating climate change. How does your type of ecosystem, the original ecosystem of Mother Earth, get us to a place where we're livestock and increasing the number of livestock is not accelerating climate change?
Yeah, I think this is like the canary on the mine, right? Where if it dies, then you gotta get out of the mine. Well, I can tell you that we've been working for more than 10 years with the Bird Conservancy organization in the US, the Nature Conservancy, Bird Conservancy Rockies, American Bird Conservancy. And there was some kind of perception that from them, that, oh no, man, we need to get rid of the cows. Now things are completely different. I mean, now we're working together, and I can tell you that, for example, my ranch is the one that is getting the most endangered and listed migratory birds south of the border of any other ranch. So when we actually revert the certification, created the grasslands, we're creating an environment for all kind of wildlife. So it's pretty exciting. I mean, if you just take that into like indicator, well, that's a great indicator because we're holding the most birds of any other ranches anywhere. Like we now have a modus tracker station that we can actually find that the same bird that started flying from Canada and North Dakota and Montana is in my ranch. So we have the hard data that what we do is really good to promote life.
So, Richard and Alejandro, what percentage of ranchers are kind of buying into this holistic, as you call it, rational way of ranching? Is it the majority of them, or is the almighty dollar forcing people to say, you know what, this sounds great, but frankly, I got to make a buck and let's just do it the old way?
Yeah, what resistance are you facing?
Well, Jonathan, you're pretty positive on that comment because most ranchers are not even making a buck. I mean, that's why most ranchers are now adopting this, the one that still have. And then we also have a problem of the next generation. The only thing that is attracting the next generation to ranching is rational grazing, holistic grazing. So yeah, it's exciting because everybody wins here. I mean, there was a point that ranchers are broken, farmers are broken. I don't know if you know this, but the highest percentage of suicide rates are on the countryside, on the farming, on the farmers. And right now, this actually is bringing hope to the ranchers and to the farmers so they can make a profit because we don't really need to buy so much stuff from the outside. It's bringing hope to the ranchers, it's bringing hope to the consumers because we're going to be delivering a more nutrient dense with less chemicals, but also it's bringing hope to so many wildlife that they really need a better environment.
And coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation, we'll have closing comments from both Alejandro Carrillo and Richard Lackey. So stay with us, don't go away.
So I'm going to ask you guys, and maybe Richard, this is more germane for you, but if you're willing to answer it, but where do you buy your meat?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. We buy it
Okay.
from Colorado ranches. Yeah, the more local you can buy it, the better.
Yeah.
And we have a saying, know your farmer, know your food. We also have a saying, save the soil, save the world.
What,
But
what about those folks? Again, when I talk to patients about eating healthy, it's fresh vegetables, fresh fruits. That costs a lot of money. Inflation, a lot of people can't afford this stuff. How do we help them?
I think it's a matter of time, John, because right now there's probably you asked that question about what's the percentage of ranchers. It's very small still. I don't think it's more than 5% anywhere I go. But reality is that if we are actually get rid of a lot of inputs, and then there will be more competition. So we need more ranchers to sell directly, and then the price is going to go down.
Okay.
Because yeah, I'm a strong believer that we all have the right to actually get good food. It has to be like a universal right, not only for certain.
that's
And
something
so
you need
what's
to make sure you share, Alejandro. When you get rid of those input costs, it takes more time and effort to get it started. But once the grasses are healthy, you get rid of the pesticides and the herbicides and all the other stuff. The actual cost to the farmer goes down, and so they're able to sell at a more competitive price, even lower than what we pay at market.
So is that like the overhead, basically, of the farm? That's you're
Yeah,
reducing your overhead?
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, most of the problems on the ranches and farmers right now are not within the ranch and farm. Is that there are some places that 80% of what a cow eats is coming from the outside. That cannot be. I mean, that is really wrong.
so they're just bringing in the feed. They're not eating what's there on the land. They're literally keeping the livestock where they are, and they're bringing in the grains that they're growing elsewhere.
They're bringing the hay and so on. And the only way for the ranchers to be more resilient is to work on the soil, on the diversity, on the grasses and the forbs. Yeah.
So what specifically do you think that RFK is going to do, or that I'm sure you have a team of folks that are going to be meeting with him to take action, and can that action be taken in 4 years or less to see
Yeah.
results?
Well, I would say that it's more like education first, because a lot of ranchers are lacking that knowledge that they need, and also capital investment. capital investment to actually start building, let's say, water infrastructures. We can graze every acre of the ranch and so on. I think if we can get support from both of those, then we can scale this up because we know how to do it. It's just that sometimes we're lacking the funds to expand it to scale.
Is that something that you can lobby for some subsidies for these farmers that do, as Richard said, let the land sit idle for a while to grow after the animals have fed? So before the next set that you bring in, there should be some sort of subsidy maybe to let the land sit and regenerate.
We have to change the incentive for the farmers. Right now, we incentivize many to do it the old way, or we incentivize traditional crop growers to grow the way they grow. We've got to start taking those same dollars and incentivize farmers to use holistic grazing technologies where they let things sit for a while. They use cover crops, or they help do amp grazing, or whatever is pertinent for their area. And that will change the structure of the soil, and that'll change the food that comes out of it. But to me, the big challenge we need in DC, one is to prioritize what are the things most important and to build ecosystems. We have a problem in government where we do projects and programs, not consistent with the rest of the ecosystem. And that project looks great, but then it falters because something else in the ecosystem is there. The way that Alejandro approaches things is the ecosystem. I mean, he brings cows in, understanding the soil, the microbiology, what the animals are doing, how they feed. So the animals are better, the soil is better, everything is better when he leaves. That's sustainable, it's resilient, and it makes every outcome better.
So Alejandro, you're going to start a business and you're going to start shipping your meat to every single one of us who are tuning in today. Just FYI. So we'll have final thoughts. We have 4 minutes in the last segment. Wondered if you could spend an extra 10 to 15 minutes after this show, as we are still live streaming online. And for those who are watching, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible content and even controversial content like this, insightful content. Like and subscribe. But would love for you guys, if you don't mind sticking around, we have quite a few patient questions coming in that we want to get answered, but we don't have time in the 4 minutes remaining in the radio portion that broadcasts in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are broadcasting live online as well. So we can continue the conversation once our good friend Colin ends up kicking us off the radio and we move into the second part of the show as well. John, do you have a few minutes as well?
I do.
Okay, good. So that would be great to just, and then what I do is afterwards, I'll combine all this content and then I refinish it. I add
Dr. John Phillips.
Welcome back, everybody. We've got 4 minutes left. So I've got a question for Alejandro and a question for Richard. So Alejandro, during the break, you had mentioned that oftentimes upwards in some places, 80% of cattle are eating things outside of the grass, if I heard that correctly. So it's your belief that if you reduce what you guys have termed as the input or kind of the overhead to feed the animals to a minimum, you can lower the costs of this meat, this healthier meat, this more kind of agriculturally sound and resilient meat to provide it to the masses. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I think you're correct, John, in what you understood. Unfortunately, we're still very small percentage of ranchers doing this. I don't think it goes more than 5%. But I think it's a matter of time because one of the goals here is to lower the inputs, lower the cost of producing, and that will allow us to actually lower the price because we do believe that all people have the right to eat healthy food.
And I'm curious from Richard's perspective as well, with the World Food Bank, is there any movement towards creating a public list of these farms and these ranches that are using this regenerative farming, regenerative ranching to produce more nutrient dense foods?
That's a great question, and there is an initiative to do that, and I'll give a shout out to Joni Kindwell Moore, who has helped do that in 5 or 7 states in the Northwest, and we're now trying to get grants and what have you to do that across the country. But more importantly, to be able to link those farmers to a platform and that platform to commercial companies with the offer of what they call an innovation brokerage to help those companies to identify how they can go and buy commercial volumes from farmers, but also how individuals can go to a place and find the people in their state. If you're in Texas, buy in Texas, Ohio, buy in Ohio, and be able to find those people easily. And so that you're shipping locally, you're buying locally. It just helps. You probably heard years ago that if you want to build bacterial resistance and viral resistance, what have you, eat honey from your local area. If you eat it from another country, it's still probably somewhat healthy, but from your local area has what you need to actually fight the things that you want. So the more local, the better.
And
What we believe is going to happen is what I call a federated model, where instead of having large companies in centralized places bringing everything in and processing it, you're going to have 80 different local places that are bringing in the beef, the pigs, the chickens, and the fruits and veggies. And then you'll have local food, and you also are then less subject to the oligopolies that have been created.
so, Richard, we've got about a minute left. You had said during the break you thought that you feel like the government needs to change the ecosystem as opposed to implementing policies that may or may not connect a web. Alejandro's doing that. So I guess if you had one ask for you could get in front of RFK Jr. or Trump or whatever, what would your ask be?
20
Our,
seconds.
Sure. Our proposal to them is to rethink using first principles ecosystem model. So if you can imagine local farmers growing what they can grow, any excesses, number twos, are dried, stored, and packaged. They're sold to FEMA to build up disaster response. So we actually have food that's available. It's put into the USDA school feeding program, SNAP program, WIC program. Groceries are involved. All of it together in one ecosystem. So all of these silos are now no longer siloed.
And
That's an
Alejandro, one final 10 seconds. What website can people go to find out more about regenerative ranching?
Well, we have our desertgrasslands.com website, but then
Perfect.
also a lot of information on the YouTube and so on. Yeah.
Always lots of information on YouTube, including our channel at youtube.com/@the way to my heart. Have a great weekend, everybody. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
A shameless plug. It never hurts.
He opened the door.
Of course he did.
Just
Yes.
speed
Yes,
that
indeed.
right
You got to
up.
walk through the door. You got to walk through the door. Come on.
You'll get that payment later, Alejandro. Thanks for that.
Yeah, exactly.
But we would like to schedule, and I don't know if Alejandro, you're always such a wealth of information as well, but Richard would love, I think that during maybe this could be part of Heart Disease Awareness Month, and it could even be even the for February 1st that we pre-record it and we can talk about regenerative farming in particular as a kickoff to Heart Disease Month. Maybe that's a great way to do it if they have the time, if they have a couple of other experts as well, can join anytime between now and February 1st so we can pre-record and have it ready to run. But that might be an option.
I'd love that because I think anytime we can share with our listeners some common sense changes that they can make in their diet, because really what we try to do from a preventative standpoint is exercise, reduce your risk factors for developing diabetes, etc., eating healthy. And the eating healthy thing is really tough for a lot of our patients because the funds aren't always there. We have so much abundance of crappy food in this country that people it's tough. And so I'd love for that if these guys are available.
Yeah, we can take it to email. If Richard, you want to put in your email, I can put it in there and see if we can coordinate, because I think that would be incredible, and we'll make this a good series, and it'll be something that I think that I would want to, John, in the spring, I would want to repeat these shows as well on the radio and just take that and broadcast them again. But I'd want to get to some questions. We had quite a few great questions, and I hope, Richard, I know that you answered a couple of them kindly in the chat, but I'd love to bring them forward because you had great answers to some great questions. First, Douglas has been so patient, and he's had so many questions that he's put in chat. I would love to allow him to speak up and ask a couple of things. Douglas, go ahead.
My mind is blown, but Alejandro, you have made a lot of sense in what I hear and what I really haven't recognized. But I live here in Texas, so when I go buy meat, what are some of the signs to look for when I know I'm buying meat that is done properly or the right way to get the best of the meat that I need to buy? Because I have HEB and like Wally World, but we don't have a lot of meat guys around here that are local meat sellers that we can go to. So when I go to the store, what are some of the ways to look for to get the best meat?
Yeah, we mentioned about the using your senses. I think they could. I don't know if you could find some local producer, but also we need to be aware of something, folks. Local doesn't mean better, right? I mean, some locals are really not doing that's a great job, but I think we still have to rely on our senses, like how does it taste and how do you feel when you actually eat that meat? That's what I can tell you. I mean, these things are evolving, and now we have a lab that can test for phytonutrients. Uh, and also there's a device that is being developed that you as a consumer can look at the nutrient dense of the food, which I think these things are coming, but until they come, I think it's all about how use your senses, how you feel, and how it tastes.
So, our
But do you
last
think that we
question
have
would be,
become, can I follow up on that really quick,
yeah,
Douglas? And before you ask your other one, you asked a really good question and good answer, but I'm curious, do you think though that we've become desensitized and we don't know what good meat actually, or we think that we're eating a good steak. It tastes good with all the salt and the butter and flavorings. And, I just had a blackened prime rib. I mean, through all of that, how do you really taste the meat to know how it's any different than what an actual good piece of meat tastes like? That's good for you.
Yeah, I don't think we have lost that sensitivity, like the taste. I think we still have it. And there's a trial of on an orphanatory where they put kids with no knowledge, all orphan kids, and they give them all kind of food like a feast, and it was very amazing. I mean, they put liver and heart and things like that, everything, candies. The kids with diabetes, they did not take the candy. So we still have that ability. It's more in our mind, what is in our mind, that, oh, you cannot eat that, you cannot that. But I think we still have that ability, to distinguish what is good and what is bad.
Can I ask a question about, and this may not be relevant, but I'm just curious, like Wagyu beef, right? So what is it? A5 is like the best, I think. And these cows supposedly get massaged and all this other stuff. Like, are they doing what you're doing? And is that why? No. Okay. Answer,
Well, no,
please.
no. Well, let me tell you something. The context in Japan is completely different than the context where I mostly work, which is the Western US, because that Wagyu breed actually needs a very fine diet. I've been helping ranchers that are actually getting they went to Japan. Think about that. Well, these ranchers are from the arid West, and those cows are eating better than us. But the problem with the Wagyu is that it's what we call a high maintenance cow that will not help us regenerate because he needs really a very high. I mean, it is not really, I think we shouldn't really be talking about the breeds, but more about what that cow ate.
But are
I
they
mean,
eating really good stuff? The Wagyu cows
well,
are
the,
eating good
well,
stuff.
the, well, the problem is that they're eating all kind of cereals.
Mm.
So to keep that beautiful fat in between the muscle, which is a characteristic of that breed, you really need to give them some kind of very special feed. But when you put it into the range, even a regenerated range, they're gonna die trying to eat that stuff. I don't think it's
So
a tool that will help us regenerate, let's say, the Western US.
So we're paying extra through the nose to make us sicker. I see Richard laughing. Did I just
Well,
call it as it is?
It works in
what do you mean by that?
Japan because they have a very small area of land and they
Yeah.
want to create the most value they can per acre. In the US, we're trying to take a more holistic approach. We have such large land masses that need to be regenerated. We really didn't learn from the dust storms of the 30s. So now we have areas that they've been tilled so much, they've been farmed incorrectly, they've been chemically treated, they're dead. And to rebuild those is a massive effort. And the solution to that is cows. That's really the solution. And those cows need to be managed in a way like Alejandro is doing, where they create their waste creates a cover on the ground that helps all those dormant seeds underground start to come back because you can't plant 1 million acres, but you can bring back dormant seeds on 1 million acres, and that comes by putting cows on it.
How long would it take to completely transform the ranching industry into doing what you're doing, Alejandro, and what you're advocating for, Richard? Are we talking a generation? Are we talking 100 years? Have you guys mapped that out at all, or at least speculated?
I think we need the young people, which I feel that those are the ones that are adopting this quicker, and it does make sense to them because in my generation, in some of your generation, and we were not really very aware of the damage that we were doing to the environment. But this new generation, they want to get involved into something that really makes sense to them. I mean, something that actually is going to regenerate the land, is going to be friendly, is going to be environment friendly. It's not going to create dust storms, it's going to create flooding, it's not going to create fires. And this is the beautiful what we do. I mean, and that's why people are just so interested on now, young people, even city folks, going and work on farms and ranches.
But how do you convince these young people that are being pushed that being vegan is the best way to go, especially because they are being told that livestock, especially cows, are high pollutants, with the gas that they excrete, and so much of it that it's truly making a difference in accelerating climate change? Does this new type of ranching solve that issue and
Yeah.
put to bed those
I mean,
concerns?
yeah, I think there's a lot of talk with methane, and methane is like a natural gas. It's the same way when we talk about carbon being like the main problem. But for us, that we understand a little bit more about what's going on in terms of climate change, for us, it's fixing the water cycle. I mean, the water is actually controls 90% of the climate, and it's actually livestock biology that will allow us to fix the water cycle.
But Kym is saying here in the chat, it's extremely hard being a farmer today with climate change. Less rain is a problem. But you're actually saying that, is it really less rain is a problem? I'm not sure I'm seeing less rain because we've had one of the wettest winters that we've ever had
No,
here in Northern California. But
Uh,
where is the problem? You're saying that because we're talking deserts, but you're talking about the ecosystem regenerating itself with sources that are in the soil and in the ground and what's deep down.
Well, I think he's right in terms of that we're getting less rain. I mean, in overall, I mean, I'm not saying a particular area, but in the Western US, let's talk about the Western US, we're getting less and less rain. But imagine that let's say, when I joined the ranch 20 years ago, we got 20 inches of rain. And you know what we did with 20 inches? Nothing, because we didn't infiltrate it. It created a lot of destruction. Now, with the kind of management we have, we only need 6 inches of rain, not to the stock. I mean, not to get rid of some cows to adjust the numbers to the current conditions. Plus, all the people doing this, they are experiencing an additional 10% of rain. We're creating microclimates. But yeah, I mean, we're getting less rain because if you don't have the vegetation that you used to have, then you're affecting the rainfall patterns.
Mm-hmm.
The desert isn't a shortage of rain, it's a shortage of trees and vegetation. And when you create an environment where trees and vegetation can grow, the water comes there. I lived in Costa Rica for a number of years, and you had farms where they were pasture completely cut down, and the rains would be slowly coming in. And then where you had forest, the rains would be heavy over the forest. And the Bible you in the part of Genesis, it said that God created a vault of water, and he separated the vault of water where that was the sea, and then the rest was in the sky. And right now there's a balance between those. And right now we have more water in the sky that should be in the ground. And we have all sorts of climate volatility as a result. But if we rebuild the ground and give it the ability, I don't know what the numbers are where you are, Alejandro, but I know in general, if we increase soil biology so that the soil organic matter grows perhaps 1%, we'll add an additional 25 to 40,000 gallons per acre of water stored in the ground. That's resiliency, that's sustainability, and that comes just from improving the structure of the soil. When roots and bacteria and mycorrhiza are in there, opening it up, more water goes in there and stores like a bank to be used when it's needed.
And I think this is important information because we just hear from the mass media, and experts that like to feed into the mass media with sound bites and research that continue to, look in one direction very myopically. They don't think logically and how science actually works. And that's what you're explaining here. People look at, well, we're having less rain, it's climate change. Oh my God, the world's coming to an end. But what is climate change and how can we influence it with these types of sustainable practices, right? Less rain might not be because of what the media might tell us it is, which is a few cars or a few cows, with excreting additional methane gas, but it's the actual land itself that is not being regenerated to healthier
Yeah.
ways.
And
That
yeah,
kind of.
think about, yeah, no, you're right. And think about for a moment, I was in India like 4 years ago, and I always trying to, in a UN convention, I was trying to promote this. So I met the Germany delegation, and when they realized that I was trying to give them a presentation about cattle, they said, no, 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 no. It takes too many liters of water to produce 1 kilo of meat. And I said, well, I don't think you're seeing it holistically. And then they gave me the opportunity to present to them. So what happened is that in our ranch in the desert, if you do an infiltration test of how much water you can infiltrate in 1 hour, on bare ground, you can infiltrate 2 inches per hour. Where we've been working to grow grasses, where there used to be bare ground, we are able to infiltrate 18 inches per hour. Just the difference between these two inches and 18 inches in the area of our ranch, which is 30,000 acres, we could meet the water needs for 100,000 people for a full year. So think about the benefits of doing this.
Let me ask a follow-up question. If we continue doing what we're doing, at some point it'll burn out, but are we going to burn out the soil sooner than we want to, or is that not in the equation?
I think we need to keep in mind, folks, that nature's times are not the same as our times. And we're not saving nature, actually. We're trying to save ourselves because nature has everything figured out. I've been in Kansas and Nebraska on areas with 40 inches, 50 inches of rain, and I have counted more cactus than in my ranch. If you go to, let's say, the Fredericksburg, Austin, all that area, now there's more cactus there, where they're supposed to be oaks and grasslands. There's more cactus there than in my ranch in the Chihuahuan desert. So nature is always ready for whatever management or mismanagement we do. How about the fires? Think about the fires. There's a study from the NASA. It's not my study. It's the NASA study, actually done in California, where they directly correlate the incident of fires, the number of fires, to the dryness of the soil. What is the way for us to actually put moisture in the soil? Livestock. Because I was in Sun Valley this year. Probably some of you know Sun Valley. All those hills, and it's not different than California, all those hills that haven't been grazed for a while, and most people are vegetarian. I respect that, but they don't want to see cows. All the hills and all the mountains surrounding Sun Valley are just annual weeds and grasses. Once you stop the rainy season, they all die. And that's really a lot of feed for fires. It's not different than California, where all the hills, when it starts raining in winter, it is all just a material for destructive fires. And that's what actually we do with the livestock. We promote grasses that are going to stay green year round. That's going to hold the water, and it will prevent the fires.
And I want to get back to Douglas because we cut him off a little bit ago. Thank you, Douglas, again for your patience. And then we have a few other questions. I think Marcia wanted to weigh in, and Kym has a few things. She's very passionate about it as well, and would love to give her a moment. So Douglas, again, thank you. Go ahead with your next question.
I think he answered it a minute ago, because I was curious about what kind of pushback are you getting here in the States with the old farmers coming into the new farmers, the families changing and all of that, and the thinking about what you're talking about, and how do you change the farmer's thought process? Because, I mean, does it really come down to the money as a farmer? You're doing this as a business. You have to make money to keep going. So what kind of process and issues are you running into with that?
Yeah, when I talk to ranchers, mostly ranchers, right? They believe more because I'm a rancher as well, and I live off the ranch. That's kind of, they start trusting. And also I try to offer them solutions that they will get results in 1 year, even if it is a desert, in just 1 year. At a small scale, but it's results. Because we ranchers don't believe on what we say, but what we see. So I tell ranchers, you need to see this as a laboratory, and be more experimental, and let's give it a try, this, and that. And it's growing because there was a lot of opposition, but now every time we give a talk or training or something, we see more ranchers, more young ranchers, father, son, father, daughter. It's changing for the good. I think they are getting more receptive.
Fantastic. And Marcia, you had a few comments in there, and it looks like Richard has answered in chat, but if you want to bring those to the forefront, I think that they're very interesting. You're bringing up some good points. Number one, with the logging, I think that is one I can actually see in the train of thought that we're continuing here, that could definitely have an impact on the climate, right? But Marcia, go ahead.
That's all I was going to say is, logging, I mean, it takes away all your shade and your undergrowth and everything. I just thought maybe that would be harmful. And then I was talking about fire. But what I've noticed now, I don't have animals on my farm, but with my crops, what I have going on in one field, that somebody was talking about the nutrients and do we know where nutrients are? But what I have on one field up here, a field, I have, a whole bunch of fields, but this field over here, the soil is so rich and so good, and everything grows so well. And it grows good over here too, but it's not the same. And I mean, they're, a quarter of a mile away. And then below me, I have a ridge that and creeks, and it always stays real wet. And that soil is completely different than my upper fields. So I don't know how you could say, like, geographically that this soil is going to be, I mean, maybe they have a lot of things in common, but they grow completely different.
Is that Richard or myself?
Go ahead.
Either
if you'd
one,
like.
both.
Well, what you see, Marcia, in your farm is the same way we see it in our ranch. I mean, it's obviously a large tract of land, but still, the same deal. I mean, the same kind of approach with the same kind of densities of the cattle, and we get completely different results. But we just adapt to that. I mean, we just recognize that there will be differences. Actually, it could be even the historical, what happened before that. For example, in my ranch, where they did a little bit of farming and tillage, it's taking probably 3 or 4 times longer to recover than when it was caused only by overgrazing, by livestock. But yeah, we need to recognize that there will be difference even in neighboring ranches, even from one pasture to the next one. They will respond different. And what we do as ranchers, we do exactly the opposite of what has been recommended. When I go to with a rancher trying to actually help a rancher, I say, show me your best pastures. We're not here to demonstrate anyone that we can regenerate the desert. First, we want to save you, and we want to get the best, faster return on investment. So we go and try to look at the best spots, and I tell the rancher, that's what you're gonna do there. A creek, a riparian, where you already have water, do a more intensive grazing there, and then leave it for a full year in the Western US. And then sometimes that's the only time that I have to visit them. And for them, just giving like a daily moves on a good area and then resting for a full year, that's enough for them to convince that that works. So I always try to prioritize your investments, going from the best to the worst, to the easiest, the most least expensive, because ask me how I did it. I did it the other way. And then, I mean, I put a lot of capital investment. I didn't see any results. And then I never started on the best areas. So that is a really key recommendation for ranchers trying to convince them to get results fast.
May I add something? What you just said about to look at your land and historically what was done on it.
Mm-hmm.
My field that's the best is usually the field where animals graze because it's closest to the barn in the spring and the water source.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So presuming we have listeners from different states, and Richard, to your point, you, I think, are in Colorado, right? You get your meat from a local rancher. Where does somebody like me go? I mean, do you just Google get to know your rancher in Ohio, or do you guys have any tips that you could provide to any of our listeners where they could get appropriately, ranched meat in their area?
Good question. I can give a short answer, and Alejandro can add. We are working to put together this digital platform that'll allow all these farmers to come together, and that is going to be tied to our TV show, which comes out next month, called Farm Hero, which you're speaking with one of those farm heroes today, Alejandro Carrillo. So we need more heroes, and he's literally helping bring up the next generation of those folks. Young people are obviously a lot more efficient at using social media than people like I. But we're hoping that as we do this, we'll get better communication between people that are growing and farming, because a lot of people are great farmers, but they're not good at social media or marketing. But there are, if I would say, look for keywords, and Alejandro, you can add to this, but I would say regenerative farming, holistic farming. What are the other ones you would suggest, Alejandro?
No, I think those would be probably the most common words. Local or your state, and then regenerative. Meat, you have to include the word meat, lamb.
And so
thank you.
We have, for example, Seven Sons that's in Ohio. And here's what they say on their website. We raise our cattle on expansive, nutrient-dense pastures, roaming freely and living as nature intended. Our approach is humane and ethical, and you'll taste the difference in every bite. Are there any questions that, let's say, John is going to call, that he should be asking to ensure that they're doing it the way you're doing it?
Ideally, you would take the time to visit the farm. Ideally.
Okay.
Yeah, ideally, because you want to get a feeling of actually, what they're doing. And then I think another question would be like, what are your cows eating year round? I mean, and in your context, Ohio, I think is what are the cows eating in winter, because that's their top time. And also remember something and keep this in mind. Grasslands, North America grasslands, were not grasslands, were forelands. And that's why I don't want to call my meat grass-fed, but more like a plant-fed. I mean, it's kind of confusing with other terms out there, but
Yeah.
Why? Because if you're doing a good job, once you establish those thick, beautiful grasslands, they're going to help fix the water cycle, and then you're going to have forbs, which is our flowering herbs. And then that's going to help the bees. And then forbs always have a more breaks or sugars and protein than grasses. And that will give it way more flavor and more life. And so if I go
So,
to a land that is actually being regenerated, then I may look for grassland, but also forbs.
so yes, so grass-fed is just kind of a buzzword, but maybe what you're hoping in the future is that the next buzzword du jour is going to be plant-fed, not just
Yes.
grass-fed. And but no one's doing that yet that I've seen, unless you're doing it on your website. And that is going to lead by example to say, you're not doing that yet. You are
No,
doing
no,
it.
no, no. I'm not.
Ah, we're going to
I'm
get
not
you to do
because
it. It'll be up later
yeah,
today.
It's a great
yeah,
idea. It's a great
But
idea.
it'll be, I think that you should lead the charge because that's something then an organization like ours, the Global PAD Association, which represents and advocates for all of these patients that have the peripheral artery disease and cardiovascular disease, that we can then put it on our website and say, hey, you may not find it, but this is what you need to start pushing for. This is what you need to start eating is plant fed, not just grass fed. We're looking for plant fed. And then we start the buzz and create that groundswell, and it'll spread, I think, like diaspora and inspire these ranchers to put it on if appropriate. But it that is a question to ask these
yeah.
grass
Well,
fed beef
I
ranchers
just,
is it plant fed or just grass?
yeah, so I just Googled holistic farming in Ohio, and I found a farm, and basic. So again, real quick, if you guys don't mind, educate me. It says all natural USDA certified grass fed cattle, raising beautiful belted Galloway cattle. We pride ourselves in efficient, self sustaining cattle. Yada yada yada. Pasture raised, USDA organic, and grass fed. Is that? I go that
That is,
if I see
I
that
mean,
farm, it looks good to me. Is that something I can wrap my arms around and
oh
eat some
yeah.
of their meat? Is that good?
I mean, yes. Oh yeah. It's good. It's good. Definitely, it's good. What
All
we're
right,
trying to teach
I'm going.
ranchers is to actually raise the bar because most ranchers are happy with just, let's say, 20 different grasses. We want ranchers to have 80, 100 different grasses plus probably 100 different forbs in such a way that when I told you at the beginning of this conversation that when you go to the ranch, let's say in spring, which is kind of the nice season, you need to see a lot of grasses, but a lot of different flowers, forbs.
Good to know. I think
Thank
this
you
has
guys so
been
much. Appreciate it very
amazing. I
much.
think we have two more questions for you. We have Douglas and Marcia again, and then we'll close out with final thoughts.
So
Douglas.
this be kind of like for Richard, I think this part, and even Ollie. So if I live on 5 acres and I'm now raising my own vegetables. What are some of the ways I can tell that my soil is getting the best, or should I do if I do it in raised beds? What are some of the best ways to get my soil to be the best?
It's a good question, and Alejandro can probably add to this as well. For one, is if you do raised beds, you want to build the bed so that it emulates nature as best you can. So like rocks and sticks on the bottom to make sure there's area to move down. You can put whatever is common in Georgia where I grew up. It may even be like mixes of red clay and other things that you normally wouldn't think. And then you put some topsoil on there, composting. And part of it for us is during the winter is to heavy compost, whatever kind of waste, leaves, grass, whatever you can on top to keep the soil warm and covered. One of the principles of regenerative agriculture is as much as you can keep roots in the ground and keep the ground covered, and don't turn the ground any more than you need to. The gentle turning of the ground so that water can soak in is what's done by animals, which is one reason that's such a benefit. But in your gardens, if you're able to keep the composting on top, what you'll find out is if you keep the ground warm, from out of nowhere, worms will appear. So to me, one of the great signs of healthy soil is when you stick your hand down in there and you pull it out and you've got a handful of worms. That's good soil. There are companies, I know the Kellogg family, and what they do is really fantastic, and they use mixes of manure and other things, and it's nicely balanced. You can add that to pretty much any raised garden with traditional soils, and it'll do well, I think.
Thank you. And Marcia, one more.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I live in South West Ohio. And when I was 100 years ago, when I was a kid, there were cattle grazing everywhere. And if I would go away, it was always like such a beautiful sight. And I knew I'd be home because of all the cattle and pigs and other things. Now you hardly see cows. And I'm just wondering, is it harder for small farmers to do that, or is it more expensive? And therefore, is the meat that most of us are eating from large large farms where like the cows aren't grazing, maybe they're in a barn and just fattened up and slaughtered. And so I'm just wondering, like, why the change?
Yeah, I think it all began when ranchers were not really as profitable as they used to be, because the purchasing power, the way we used to sell our cattle, we could afford to buy a lot of stuff. I mean, it's catching up now, but it's been many years that the price of what we were getting for a live cattle didn't allow us to purchase a lot of stuff. And then obviously the degradation of the soil. I mean, we have less and less carrying capacity on our ranches, because I think someone mentioned here in this call that we're getting less rain. That is not our reality. We're getting less rain, or the rain comes like in a very big storm, and then if you have compacted soils, and also I don't know if there's an agenda for us to eat more grains, but a lot of what used to be pasture land or grassland has been converted into cropland. And then also the misunderstanding, or see, we ranchers are very slow at adapting to new stuff. Sometimes it takes 30 years. And on those 3 years of trying to make a change to something new, then we could potentially lose the next generation.
Yeah.
So that's some of the things that actually are different now. And now the price of land is so expensive nowadays. I mean, there's a lot of investors that have bought land or multiple ranchers. And then, during COVID, a lot of people moved to the countryside. And then it's very difficult now to justify an investment on land versus the return on investment on the cattle.
Yeah, and you have other countries coming in and buying up the land, and corporate interests buying up the land to feed their interests, and that makes it a lot harder for the smaller farmers that are doing things right and doing exactly what you say. And I'm hoping that that's something that RFK will change and de-incentivize those corporate interests who are buying things up to maximize the almighty dollar, and prioritize the smaller farmers that are doing the right thing and doing exactly what you mentioned earlier, which was to localize everything to improve the nutrient density of our food, which will ultimately improve our health. But we got to get the universities behind it. We got to get the NIH to say, hey, we want to invest in those organizations that are going to be doing studies that will lead to healthier food, going back to the old ways. Am I on track, Richard?
Amen. I think you're 100%. One of the things we're hoping to do, one of the new TV shows we're looking to launch is actually a competition TV show where we work with minority farmers and veterans and young farmers, and they have mentors like Alejandro that are helping give them insight on their decades of experience and see who can win. But you essentially put them in land and let them start managing, and then they work as a collaborative group, and now they build a group of folks in a certain area. And now that's a source, and you can aggregate enough that it's institutional volume, enough to justify an abattoir, enough to justify a local market, and all that sort of thing. But to Dr. Phillips' earlier point, this is a time where really not only does it not matter what political perspective you come from, it's one that literally brings people together. So if you're far left-leaning tree-hugging granola cruncher, or if you're a right-wing crazy, it doesn't really matter. Everybody wants healthier soil, healthier water, and better nutrition. So.
I would just say from a medical standpoint, as I said before, food is medicine. We're learning more. And I think gentlemen like you and what we try to do here on the show is just raise awareness. And just on a side note, Richard, if you need anyone to come in and test them
or try the food that and meat that these guys are raising on that TV show, you just give us a call. We're happy to fly in. At least I know I am.
That's, the other thing to me that I think Alejandro really hit it earlier. If you're not sure, buy some meat and try it out, and try 2 or 3 of them, and you'll tell the difference, and you'll find the one that you like. And we've done that. We buy mostly from Colorado ranches, but there's 1 or 2 that we can absolutely tell the difference in, and that's where we go buy again. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree.
great.
And I saw you, Alejandro, you were smiling about the show that's coming up. Have you started taping this show, and how can we find out more and sign up or subscribe to that website, that channel, to get push notifications for when these episodes air? And do you have a network that it's going to be airing on?
That's very kind. Thank you for the advertisement. It's called Farm Hero, and the first 9 episodes will actually launch at the end of February. It'll be on EarthX TV. So everywhere where EarthX TV is featured, you'll be able to find it. It will also be on something called the Pursuit channel, and then we hope that we have 2 additional channels. So there'll be about 60 million, hopefully, households that'll have capacity to watch the show. And the first season was we traveled to different state for every farmer, and Alejandro would have been the launch, but Alejandro, as you can tell, is traveling around the world, making the world better. So it's hard to get him nailed down. You guys are quite lucky. That's why I say hi to him. I was actually in his backyard in Chihuahua a few weeks ago, and he was in Germany or Saudi Arabia or somewhere. But
Wow.
Alejandro will hopefully be on one of the episodes for season 2, which we're already preparing to film. And our whole goal is just what the name is to let people know that farmers are heroes. And they are the ones that have solved many problems in the past, and they're going to solve some of the biggest challenges today. When you talk about water, health, nutrition, soil, air, all of that begins with the farmer. And so we're excited to incentivize people, young people and others, to start joining in the movement of regenerative agriculture and holistic agriculture. And
is that farmheroes.com, farmhero.com?
You can go to farmhero.com on the web, and
Okay.
I'd suggest people follow it on Facebook and certainly on Instagram. And there'll be a lot of contests going out for free shirts and hats and all sorts of things. So just follow it on Instagram and Facebook and what have you. But thank you for that opportunity, Kym.
No, we really appreciate you both. John, Phillips, any final thoughts?
Now, again, I'm excited personally to learn more about this as it pertains to just trying to create a healthier environment for my patients and those that listen. And when I say environment, I just mean, I guess it's kind of that ecosystem that we've talked about. It's what you put in your body, how you exercise, how you reduce inflammation and things of that nature, all with the goal to be proactive and preventative. Unfortunately, when folks are coming to see me, their plumbing's clogged up already, and we need to start addressing these issues in folks in their 20s and 30s and not in their 60s and 70s. So truly appreciate the time that you guys have given us. It's